This also brings me that today organizations have a lot of things around multi-generational workforce, right? And there's a lot of things happening there, and issues also that they face when the kinds of how they get things done across these different generations, and teamwork being one of the biggest competitive advantage that organizations can really capitalize on. So what are you seeing as the missing links in this equation of getting this multi-generational workforce working together and becoming and delivering like high performing teams? What's missing there, Shri?
I think at the core, there is a lack of appreciation for the value that the other generation brings.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If we just resort to name calling, right? You millennials, you baby boomers, or whatever, right? In a way, we are being very judgmental and not being very curious.
Correct.
Right? Because we've kind of written off that generation to say this generation is like this and they're not, no good, or this generation is like this and they're no good, which in a way, such organizations are depriving themselves of amazing latent talent that exists, but that needs to be harnessed and leveraged a little bit differently.
Correct.
And so again, that agility of being able to say there's a lot that can be gained by some of the older generations and some of the younger generations, how do we kind of bring that all together is the key, right? So if you think about diversity, for instance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Historically, diversity has been more focused on gender and race and so on and so forth. But I think one of the most important pieces of diversity is being able to manage diversity of thought.
Correct.
Right? Recognizing that different people have different points of view, and how do we harness and leverage all that stuff versus only focusing on one and shutting out the other.
Correct.
And I think it's the same kind of stuff when it comes to the multi-generational dynamics.
Correct.
Right? So when the baby boomers, if you want to think about it, can get more curious about the millennials, and instead of just saying, I used to do it this way, they don't do it this way, so it's not going to work. And vice versa, when the millennials can think about like, hey, what can we learn from the baby boomers? And how can we, incorporate those things? Then interesting things begin to happen. But that requires you to kind of be a little bit more vulnerable, be a little bit more curious, and experiment and take some more risks. That's what I think needs to happen more.
There could be these biases that teams have, and how has that come in the way of getting to that larger objective or becoming that best team to perform, or the high performing teams? What's really happening there with biases? What is your observation, Shri?
Yeah, absolutely. I think biases are all at play, and usually they're unconscious, they're invisible. So one of the first steps that we need to take is make the invisible visible. Right? Create the opportunities where these biases can come to surface and we can just look at them, right? Without judging them too harshly, with a compassionate view of like, what is it that you believe? Or what is it that you might be believing and operating with that could be questionable? It's not whether it's always right or wrong, but is there some gray area there? Right. So the first step is about surfacing that stuff. And then if people can take perspective on that, they can say, we have been operating with these implicit norms based on certain biases. Let's try out something different and have some new explicit norms, which might give us better outcomes. And then experiment with that, play with that, and see what happens. I think that first step of creating the space, the psychological safety, as Amy Edmondson talks about, where we can at least surface those things and talk about it, I think is the key.
True.
Right. And all of that requires, enormous amount of trust, right? Vulnerability-based trust that needs to exist. And so teams have to really work on those things. They're not just going to happen by magic. And, sometimes they might be dismissive to say that's a soft stuff. But I feel like unless you do both of those things, you're not going to get the hard results that you're going for.
True.